I'm Jeremy Scahill from Dropsite News, dropsitenews.com. It's been 10 days since Israel launched an unprovoked campaign of sustained bombing against the Islamic Republic of Iran. Hundreds of Iranian civilians have been killed, and Israel has waged a widespread campaign of assassination targeting military and intelligence leaders, including commanders of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, as well as nuclear scientists and other technical experts. In some cases, these assassinations have been conducted in crowded residential buildings, bringing large civilian death tolls. Israel has attacked medical sites in Iran, ambulances, civilian neighborhoods. Estimates range from 400 to 900 Iranians killed so far, and well over 3,000 others injured in the Israeli attacks. Iran's Red Crescent and regional civil defense organizations estimate that more than 40,000 people have been displaced since the bombing began. On Monday, Israel continued its intense attacks against the Iranian capital, Tehran. This weekend, the United States overtly, and I say overtly because the US has been facilitating Israel's war against Iran from the beginning, but it overtly joined Israel's war against Iran, launching a series of bombings targeting several Iranian nuclear sites in an operation that the United States called Midnight Hammer. President Donald Trump claimed that Iran's nuclear capability has been totally decimated, and he offered praise for himself for his decision to bomb Iran, despite offering no evidence that Iran posed any imminent threat to the United States. Iran has suggested that these attacks, which included the use of multiple 30,000-pound bombs, did far less damage than the US and Israel have suggested, and that Iran may well have evacuated its most important assets, including enriched uranium and vital equipment, in advance of these anticipated attacks. Soon after the US bombing ended, Mehdi Mohammadi, a senior advisor to the Speaker of Iran's parliament, said, quote, "From Iran's perspective, nothing particularly surprising has happened. Iran has been expecting an attack on Fordo, one of the main nuclear sites, for several nights. The site was evacuated long ago and has not sustained any irreversible damage in the strike." Mohammadi added, quote, "Two things are certain. First, knowledge cannot be bombed. Second, this time the gambler will lose." On several occasions, Donald Trump and Israel have floated the possibility that they would seek to assassinate Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, with Trump saying that the US knows his precise location. While Trump administration officials have claimed that the US does not seek a wider war against Iran, current developments suggest that is not the case. On Sunday night, Trump posted on his Truth Social site, quote, "It's not politically correct to use the term regime change, but if the current Iranian regime is unable to, all capital letters, make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change?" He ended it with MIGA, M-I-G-A, which could mean make Iran great again, or make Israel great again. When Israel first launched its bombing campaign against Iran, the US was publicly claiming to be involved in good faith negotiations with Iran over the nuclear issue. In fact, another round of talks was scheduled for that weekend. In reality, the US was engaged in a concealment operation aimed at giving Israel the element of surprise as it launched its bombing against Iran on June 13th. That same scenario played out late last week, just 30 hours after the White House announced that Trump would make a decision in the next 2 weeks on whether the US would directly attack Iran. B-2 stealth bombers, submarines, and other US assets were bombing sites across Iran. These were the first publicly acknowledged US military strikes inside of Iran since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. What the world is now witnessing is a US-Israeli war of aggression against Iran that notorious neoconservatives like Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz spent their entire careers working toward. Never before in history has an Israeli ruler been more empowered and unrestrained than Benjamin Netanyahu has been over the past 20 months. His genocidal war in Gaza continues to intensify as the world's attention has abated. Every single day, many dozens of Palestinians are murdered as they desperately seek access to the meager supplies of food that the US and Israel have allowed into Gaza as part of a cynical plan that Netanyahu has openly said will allow him to continue and complete Israel's war of conquest in Gaza. Israeli disseminated maps show areas that have been declared off limits to Palestinians in Gaza that depict an ever-shrinking killing cage, where Palestinians are being forced into this small territory against the sea as Israel continues to slaughter them in an operation that Netanyahu says is aimed at expelling the Palestinians from Gaza. Israel's continuing its war against the occupied West Bank and the expansion of illegal settlements. It assassinated Hezbollah General Secretary Hassan Nasrallah and scores of other Hezbollah leaders in Lebanon, killed thousands of civilians, and continues to bomb that country despite a so-called ceasefire. The Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad was overthrown, and Israel swiftly moved to systematically attack Syria's conventional military capabilities, its defensive capabilities, and has expanded its occupation of Syrian territory. With the formal launch of the US-Israeli war against Iran, it seems that the entire notion of any sort of rules-based global order, as Western leaders call it, has been tossed into the wastebin of history. Both Trump and his close ally, the indicted war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu, have made clear they have no respect for any international conventions, international law, world court rulings. The stated justification for the war against Iran is a nuclear-grade fraud, an epic lie that Netanyahu has spent his entire political career trying to sell. Israel is the sole entity with nuclear weapons in the region, and it has used that fact as part of its wars of annihilation and aggression. The consensus in the US intelligence community since 2003 has been that Iran has not been actively pursuing a nuclear weapon. It was Donald Trump who ripped up the nuclear agreement with Iran in his first term. We should be clear that the message being sent right now by this US-Israeli war is that nuclear weapons are the only real deterrent against Israel and its chief sponsor and protector. Israel is not a member of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran is. Iran's foreign minister said Sunday that the NPT had failed to protect Iran. Iran's Speaker of the Parliament announced Monday that Iran is going to cease cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency. That's a direct result of the US bombings of Iran. To discuss the widening US-Israeli war against Iran, I'm very pleased to be joined now by the Iranian international law scholar, Dr. Helyeh Doutaghi. Many of our viewers are certainly familiar with her and her case. You may recall in March, she was suspended and ultimately fired by Yale University after a Zionist-led campaign involving an AI-generated news article sought to portray her as a member of a terror organization. She served as the deputy director of the Law and Political Economy Project at Yale. We did the first interview with Dr. Doutaghi in March as she was being targeted and threatened. She is a scholar of international law and geopolitical economy, and she's now a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Tehran. Dr. Helyeh Doutaghi, thank you so much once again for joining me.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, for having me. It's a pleasure.
So I want to begin with your broad analysis of what is now unfolding. This isn't a soundbite show. You can really explain your ideas, which is why I wanted to talk to you. But give us your analysis of what we're seeing unfold with this US-Israeli war against Iran, the timing of it, and what you see as the agenda at play.
I mean, you start with a pretty accurate and comprehensive analysis of what has happened. And I just want to, I guess, add to that. And let me start by this point that it is very important to recognize that we are at a historic inflection point in history, one that is very much rooted in October 7th, anti-colonial operation of Al-Aqsa, which has essentially set the motions of the forces that are going to shape and are shaping the very formation of the new world order, both specifically globally, but also specifically in West Asia. So the Israeli regime appears to be executing a three-phase operation or plan against Iran. And unlike its prior aggressions, in Yemen, in Syria, in Lebanon, and of course the ongoing genocide in Palestine, this aggression is encountering a radically different material conditions, hence the different forces that we're seeing at play. And I'm going to go through the three phases that I think have unfolded or are unfolding, and maybe we can discuss that together. And the very first phase, obviously, was what you explained. The operation was very much designed to target the command structure and inflict widespread terror on civilians by exploiting the element of surprise. And this phase was successful for the most part, in my opinion, because while Iran was at the negotiating table, as you mentioned, there was a coordinated wave of strikes targeting Iranian civilians, residentials, and military sites, as well as nuclear facilities in Natanz in the first round of strikes that are under and were under IAEA safeguard, right? So the victims of the first day's attack, including significant senior military officials, civilian scientists. We had several university professors, including the president of Azad University in Tehran, one of the prominent universities in Iran, and women and children. And they were overwhelmingly located in residential neighborhoods. Many were killed in their homes. The attack took place in the middle of the night, and many were killed with their families sleeping in the middle of the night. And while several high-profile assassinations, as I said, were assassinated, 5 out of 12 that they aimed to assassinate were killed in the first night. And the intent was really clear. It was to paralyze Iran's command structure and instill a mass fear through the targeting of civilians. And in the first few hours, Iran's air defense was also compromised significantly, which limited the capacity of the state to defend their airspace. And as a result of that, over 100 strategic sites and civilian objects were hit within the first 6 to 12 hours, I believe, and significant damage was done. So the objective of the attack was not only tactical militarily, but it was also psychological, right? So it was very much to induce this fragmentation of loss of control. And what was significant, and I think arguably unprecedented, was the fact that Iran was able to observe the attack and so incredibly quickly retain its structure and come back to an offense mode. And this was partly a miscalculation of Israel. It was the depth of Iran's revolutionary structure. And within 6 hours, I believe, 7 hours, the command was restructured, air defense was restored, and offensive capacity was activated. And it was less than 24 hours, if not, it was like 12 hours, that the first round of attacks of Iran in self-defense was launched, right? And the first round were firm, they were calibrated, and they were targeted at important military objectives. And they also passed through, it's very significant to note that the fact that the hits were and are continuously successful in occupied territories is due to the fact that the missiles go through multi-layered interceptions with the most advanced military equipment of the collective base, right? The first layer probably starts in one of the Arab reactionary regimes, Jordan probably, in terms of intelligence, and it goes through until it hits the target. So there are multi-layered levels of interceptions that these missiles pass. And, Iran developed this. Doing so, it completely disturbed the Israeli strategic assumptions and revealed that the readiness of the state that has spent decades, especially preparing for this moment, especially after the Western-backed Iraqi invasion of Iran between 80 and 88, it was prepared for this moment, right? And this happened in the background of the most comprehensive sanctions regime that was inherently designed to both de-develop and also disarm Iran. And so this was the first step and the first phase of the attack. And I think the second phase that is not enough being talked about, especially in English spaces, is the gravest miscalculation so far, and that is the manufactured unrest that U.S. and Israeli regimes were counting on to happen. This stage was operation hinged on provoking internal chaos. It was attempted to incite civil unrest through a coordinated campaign of Mossad-linked operation. We had a lot of, and we still do, a lot of infiltrators and Mossad agents domestically that are operating and are carrying these attacks forward. So it was a hybrid warfare, rather, of psychological warfare, propaganda, and also domestic and external attacks happening. But the intelligence assessments assumed that the shock of the military escalation immediately, combined with the cumulative impact of years of sanctions and economic hardship on people, and lower electoral participation. We had the lowest electoral participation in Iran. It was less than 50% in the latest election. And the memory of the previous attempts of color revolutions, including, imperialist campaigns such as Women Life Freedom, which was hijacked by imperialist forces from what was legitimate grievances of Iranian women, but it was very much hijacked and took away from them. So they were counting on this, and in their assessments, the state was really weak, and the conditions for revolt were ready, and they were hoping that this push would just bring people to the streets to facilitate the collapse or the regime change, right? And these escalations were also assumptions were also further emboldened by the recent significant setbacks experienced across the resistant front, right? Including the successful regime change in Syria and the assassination of key leaders, as you mentioned, including Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, Yahya Sinwar, Helyeh. And Israeli and US intelligence concluded that by activating domestic infiltrators and Mossad operatives, as well as utilization of the entire political capital of the Iranian regime changers, including the monarchists, including the MEK, which essentially, what they're doing right now by supporting Israel and Israeli invasion is a political suicide. So they're really expending their entire political capital to bring out public anger. And they were trying, or they are still trying, to redirect the public anger against the government, which would be blamed for provoking the aggression, right? That's the narrative they want to go with. So they were relying heavily on the kind of political disorientation that they had previously managed to cultivate under sanctions and covert operations. And yet, what we have witnessed over the past 10 days now is quite the opposite. Rather than fragmentation, the Iranian response within the society has been marked by a deep national cohesion, solidarity, and popular mobilization, and they've been unified in defiance in the face of foreign invasion, and in the face of non-stop, multi-layered assault of their unity over the years. They're making the conscious decision to rally behind the state, and quite literally and figuratively around the flag, which is the opposite of what the US and Zionists had anticipated. And this reaction is very much rooted, in my opinion, in not merely the nationalism of Iranians, but also in a revolutionary and civilizational consciousness that has preserved a culture of resistance and unity within the people across class, across political orientation, race, and gender within Iran. And the nation now that has emerged from the 79 revolution, and which was then followed immediately by the Western-backed Iraqi invasion, and not only politically transformed, but socially reorganized. And this is very much anchored in religion. It is rooted in the land, and it is sustained by the living memory of anti-colonial struggle that is historical to the Iranian nation, right? And this is all despite the very real internal contradictions that Islamic Republic experiences, and it continues to draw its strength. The Iranian revolutionary project, it has always, since '79, drew its strength and resilience from this foundational legacy in the revolution, and the resistance that was collectively developed against the Iraqi invasion. And I believe the failure of the second, and I'm going to quickly wrap up here with the first question so that we can continue the discussion. I believe the failure of the second phase posed challenges among other factors, of course, to the third phase of the operation, which was the military escalation through the direct US involvement. And as you very, very rightly mentioned, it was through and through, it has been since day one, a US Zionist aggression against Iran. But the decision to enter this officially, I think it can partly be rooted in the declining American empire, which is effectively unable to sustain its wars through Zionist proxy within the region. And its material capacity to project force globally is not like before, right? What we're seeing in Iran, the extent of attack on Iran, and this is by no means to downplay what has happened, and we're going to talk about it, but comparing what they've done, the atrocities that they've done in Iraq and Afghanistan when they invaded them the first day, versus their attack on Iran is not comparable. And I think that it speaks to the declining American empire and also to its inability to project force globally, at least to some degree, right, compared to before. And the military failure of Israel has underscored what Israeli officials themselves have framed as an existential war, in which Israel's existence depends on the destruction of Iran. Now, it's hard to say what the US strike achieved. We know that they targeted the 3 nuclear facilities in Iran, including the main nuke site in Fordo. And Trump announced that Fordo, quote unquote, Fordo is gone, right? But what we saw today, for example, or yesterday rather, was that the Israeli regime attacked Fordo. They targeted Fordo again. And Iran has been silent about the extent of the damage that it has experienced. And ambiguity on all of this remains, and we don't know what the attacks actually achieved. And the impact on those sites remains unverified. There is no way of verifying it because Iran is still not sharing details, and the IAEA inspections are also not allowed in, despite their several requests. And so the US attacks makes one question for me, and that is, if this was a genuine strategic operation, and if so, what was it meant to achieve? Or was it a political theater, symbolic and rather moral boosting maneuver for the collapsing Israeli regime under Iranians' sustained attacks, right, which have been crushing? So Iran seems to have a deliberate strategy of information control and ambiguity, not only on this, but also on its defense capacity. From day one, it has launched missiles, and it continues. And every day we're seeing the reveal of new kind of latest technology, like new technology and new missiles that are being launched. Its naval capacities remained undisclosed. its oil-based deterrence strategies in the Strait of Hormuz and Bab al-Mandab, probably through Ansarullah. We don't know what they look like. We don't know what their strategy is, but we can talk about possibilities of those. And they have yet to be activated. And its Air Force capacity is beyond missiles. We don't know what they look like either. And Iran is also still largely, we don't know its capacity on the ground forces that it can unleash, right? And that is widely believed, the ground forces of Iran are widely believed to be one of Iran's strongest assets that have yet to be fully mobilized in this war. And in all of this, what is most dangerous is the unpredictability of a collapsing empire and the Zionist entity that has conducted the genocide over the past 20 months. The Zionist entity breeds recklessness. These actors have been, as I said, they are in possession of nuclear weapon, and they have proven to be the most vicious, lawless, and barbaric actors that could inflict a lot of harm and a lot of damage on the humanity.
But I wonder what your sense is of who even is on Iran's side right now. I don't mean politically, I don't mean ideologically. Who is there to actually even support Iran in this situation? Because it doesn't seem like Russia and China will do anything except issue strongly worded statements and try, preemptively failing actions at the United Nations.
That's a good question, and one that is widely being asked. And there are a few points here. Number one, we've seen, as you mentioned, that the official discourse, both China and Russia have publicly affirmed Iran's right in very strong terms. Its right to self-defense, condemned Israeli strikes as acts of aggressions in violation of UN Charter, prohibition on the use of force, and warned the United States against further escalation or direct military intervention. Their positions, while cautious in tone, very much aligned with international law. Second, unlike Israel, right, that turned to the United States as its proxy, and because it explicitly functions as the proxy of the United States in our region, Iran has not requested, in fact, military intervention, at least publicly, from China or Russia. Iran's strategy remains firmly rooted in autonomous, homegrown defense capacity, and to expect Beijing or Moscow to intervene militarily uninvited is to misunderstand both the regional balances of power in the region, but also the terms of which Iran engages with its allies. And third, even if there is material support, and I think there is, I think that in terms of intelligence sharing or even weapons transfer, it can very much exist, but it will not be broadcasted. It is not something that they would be sharing publicly about it. And even more importantly, China is the biggest trade partner of Iran. China continues to purchase roughly 70% of Iran's oil in open defiance of Western sanctions, US imposed sanctions. And that alone represents a significant contribution to the financing of Iran's domestic defense technological advancement, directly or indirectly, right? And if I want to critically reflect on this question, and the question often comes, as we've seen in social media and discourses, from observers whose own governments are supplying the bombs to the Zionist entity. They're funding the occupation. They're underwriting the war machine and death machine of Israel. And instead of confronting the role of their own regimes in perpetuating this genocide and the aggressions in West Asia, they direct their scrutiny towards, other nations in the global South, why others in the global South are not doing more. And this rather externalization of responsibility reflects a deeper imperial logic, one that looks outward for a savior rather than inward for sovereignty. And at the heart of it, there is a confusion. China is not going to liberate Palestine. Russia is not going to defend Iran. It is Iran that will defend Iran. It is Palestine that will liberate Palestine. It is the engineers, the commanders, and the civilians, and they do not wait or need to be saved. And by no means am I suggesting that that was what you were proposing, but I think the idea that the bigger powers must intervene is a symptom of imperial conditioning. The belief that liberation must be granted by power rather than seized through a struggle. And this is not to confuse the deep strategic cooperation, as I said earlier in the response, how China is strategically cooperating in and partnering with Iran, and vice versa, with similarly with Russia. That is not to confuse multipolarity, and that is, I think, at the very core of this emerging East Bloc that is emerging for this new world order that is shaping, that while there are deep strategic cooperation based on respect for sovereignty, but there is also look independence and autonomy, and look inward rather than from outside.
You know, I part of also why I'm asking that question is that you hear often from Palestinians on the ground in Gaza questioning how Arab countries can watch Israel conduct this genocide, and their tanks and their aircraft and all these, they're sitting there, and some of those very countries that will never dare challenge Israel in any way militarily, and often not even really in a strong way diplomatically, participate in the defense of Israel when Iran is launching missiles in response to Israel attacking Iran. And you know, the recent history between some Arab Gulf nations and Iran is one of great animosity and emanating from Saudi Arabia and other countries toward Iran. And in the first Trump administration, you know, part of what was happening is that Israel, and this related to the Abraham Accords, the normalization agreements with Israel, that there was the emergence of a coalition, an anti-Iran coalition that had several Arab nations at the heart of it, with Trump and Netanyahu. And yet now you have another situation where Israel is not only committing a genocide in Gaza, is waging a war against the occupied West Bank and occupied East Jerusalem, is now waging a war of aggression with overt U.S. participation for the first time since 1979 that we know of. And I guess my broader question is just, in this world that we live in, how is it that these nations can just stand by and allow Israel to do this? So when I bring up Russia or China, I take all of your points. But I would also put the question to you about other Muslim nations in the region. And the fact that you do have a nuclear power. Trump said Iran is the bully of the region. I mean, this is a sick joke. Anyone who knows the history of the past 77 years knows who the premier bully is in that region, and it's Israel. We all know that Israel has nuclear weapons. So I guess my question was more broadly, if other nation states are not willing to militarily confront an aggressive, offensive, war-making party, then what kind of world are we looking at?
No, I hear you, and to add insult to injury, you know, the significant portion of the recycling of the dollar happens through the deals that are made with these Arab reactionary regimes by the United States, right? The oil money comes back and funds the war machine that is being used against the Palestinians and the broader region. And I take your point. It is this is precisely why what we're witnessing right now truly is the complete and official exit of the collective West from the international legal order that was created after World War II to never allow this to happen. Everything that we're seeing today, the international legal system was designed to prevent. And the fact that we're seeing it happen so systematically and so repeatedly, I mean, the war crimes that are happening in Iran right now, we've been seeing that obviously in an uncomparable scale, unfold in Palestine, the targeting of hospital, everything that is considered a war crime under customary international law, humanitarian workers, ambulances, hospitals. There are grave violation of international law that has been normalized, and we are seeing that done so systematically and with structural impunity. What that calls for is the necessity to abolish the existing order, and that requires, I am very hopeful for coalitions and organizations like BRICS. And I sincerely hope that we see legal frameworks developed within these structures as well, so that there are new and alternative international legal organizations, international legal courts, and as we've seen with other genocide and systemic wars that empires have waged historically, tribunals that are going to not be protecting the Western imperialism, US imperialism, that is allowing and facilitating and enabling this genocide to happen. I share your frustration.
Yeah, I mean, I'm relaying what I'm also hearing out of Gaza every day, and I think it's a really fair question, especially if you're watching everyone around you being murdered in a genocide, and your time is going to come. I think it's a legitimate question that many people are asking. We only have a couple minutes left, but I wanted to make sure to ask you two other things. One is this effort to try to manufacture the descendant of the Shah of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, as sort of the ruler in waiting. And you have these Western countries increasingly sort of promoting this idea that he could be a unifying figure to take over Iran, which I think normally would be sort of a joke, except when you have the most powerful nation in the world making direct threats to the supreme leader of Iran and saying, we know exactly where he is and we don't need to do anything now, but he should watch it because we may decide to do something. Trump, who claimed that he was against regime change wars in the region, starts to sort of say, well, this is maybe some semantics, and implying that there could be an indigenous uprising in Iran, which, of course, would be U.S. and Western supported. But I'm curious your take on that dynamic. You don't have to talk too much about the Shah and his descendant, but just this notion that there may well be an effort to decapitate the government and foment not necessarily rebellion, but foment a change of government to one that would be largely controlled by the U.S. and or Israel.
No, I think it's a very real effort and a very real aim that has been pursued through very different means for decades now, right? And obviously, since the revolution, the United States has aimed to ensure that the Iranian Revolution, which essentially protected and secured secured the flow of capital and resources from Iran as a peripheral state to the core, the revolution put a stop to it. And so ever since, the entire aim has been either to contain Iran or contain Iran to achieve and conduct regime change and walk towards regime change. The sanctions regime, which immediately started, in fact, before the Islamic Republic revolution, the sanctions regime against what is widely believed was first imposed when Mossadegh nationalized Iran oil in 1951. And it was against the sovereignty. So while sanctions are believed to be imposed because of the Islamic Revolution, it was actually imposed when Iran practiced its sovereignty over its resources at 51. The first sanctions were in fact imposed on Iran's oil industry. And then it succeeded in creating conditions for revolt, and Mossadegh was overthrown through a Mossad CIA operative, which led to the 79 revolution. And 79 revolution, we see again new imposed sanctions on Iran, and followed immediately 1 year after the revolution, the Western-backed Iraqi invasion started, which took 8 years of this newly independent revolution that was going to figure out what it is that Iranian wants to make their country and make their society, and which forces are, they had to focus on protecting the territorial integrity of the country. So all that energy had to be diverted to protecting the sovereignty. And once that failed, they couldn't topple the regime, and they couldn't overthrew the government. We've seen extensive sanctions, particularly with the development, economic and industrial and military development of Iran. So the first night that Iran was attacked, we saw the very first sanctions regime that I mentioned on oil industry. The first night of military attacks 10 days ago, it targeted oil terminals and gas refineries in Iran. So we saw sanction and we saw bombing of those facilities. The revolution, which was sanctioned, we see the military campaign that is happening, aiming to overthrow the regime. We see and then the next round of sanctions was directed at the nuclear industry of Iran. And what we see is the direct bombing of nuclear facilities in Iran. And the latest round of sanctions over the past decade, we see the targeting of Iranian missiles and Iranian conventional weapons. And what we see immediately when Iran is being bombed is the targeting of its military capacities and missiles storage and the individuals who developed those, right? So what we're seeing is the continuous attempt, to answer your question, the continuous attempt through a multi-layered hybrid warfare, through sanctions, through war, through covert operation, through sabotage, through color revolution, through hijacking of internal contradictions of Iran, and turn them into regime change projects every time, with every contradiction throughout the past 40 years. And we see that materialized right now, and this is where we are. Even what is fascinating to know about individuals who were assassinated, including the most recent Amirali Hajizadeh, or previous scientists such as Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, I believe, who was nuclear scientist, or rather the father of nuclear scientists. They were individually targeted on their blacklist of sanctions regime. And this is overwhelmingly true with who is assassinated, and you look at them being targeted before their assassination. And these sanctions regime, even when they're targeting individuals, they're essentially developing a hit list for Mossad and CIA to then go ahead and assassinate them. So yeah, it's a real project that's been pursued for the past, since the inception of it goes back to Mossadegh, and I don't think it is going to stop now. They are continuing to pursue that project, and I don't believe they're going to win.
Finally, you've been now blacklisted in U.S. Academia. You were driven out of Yale University, and under a really spurious attack against you. And I'm just, as we stated at the beginning, you're now doing a postdoctoral research fellowship at the University of Tehran. What can you say about what's happened since we first interviewed you in March, when you were under active attack by Yale University and they hired lawyers with connections to, Israeli entities and others to go after you? What can you say about how you're handling this situation and what's been happening with you?
Thanks for asking that, Jeremy. I've been healing, and I've been trying to reflect on how it is important to be actively engaged with institutions that not only we try to force them to divest from genocide, but rather in institutions that are actively invested in anti-colonial resistance. And that really helped me make my decision about, working and being at an institution that not only allows me to be true to my principles, especially in this moment, and not compromise on them, but also actively support me for doing so. And yeah, it's good to be here and doing this in this specific moment.
All right. Well, we're really happy that you were able to join us today. Dr. Helyeh Doutaghi is a scholar of international law, geopolitical economy. As I said, she's now doing this postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Tehran. To remind people, last spring, she was politically targeted in a campaign aimed at portraying her essentially as a terrorist that led to initially her suspension and then driving her out of Yale University, where she had been the deputy director of the Law and Political Economy Project. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that does it for this episode. Make sure to follow us on our podcast feed by searching for Dropsite News wherever you get your podcasts. Also, please make sure, if you can, to leave us a rating or a review. It really does help other people to find us because of how algorithms work. If you want to support our work, you can subscribe to dropsitenews.com. We don't put anything behind our paywall, but we do ask people with the means to become a paid subscriber or to gift paid subscriptions to other people. That's what ultimately fuels our journalism. One bonus is that you can make 501c3 tax-deductible donations to support our work by going to dropsitenews.com and clicking on ways to give or donate. Make sure to follow us on all social media platforms. I know some people really don't like X and Twitter, but we happen to have a really, really good news feed that operates essentially as a near 24/7 newswire with reports from all around the world. Make sure to also tell your friends, your family, even your foes about our work. On behalf of the entire team at Dropsite News, I want to thank everyone for subscribing, for reading, for listening, for watching. Until next time, I'm Jeremy Scahill.